Okay, so we're going to talk about pin tucks. I'm going to show you how to make these pretty little tucks that you sometimes see in heirloom sewing on children's clothing. You can put them on tea towels or really anything you want to make pretty. I have a lot of ideas for these, but I just learned how to do these. I'm not an expert, so if I can do it, you can do it. I'm definitely not an expert, but I thought they were so pretty I had to share them. So let's talk about what we need first. So you need a pin tuck foot and the grooves on the back of the foot. So depending on your machine, so 5 groove, they sell 7 groove and 9 groove. It just depends what brand machine you have. I have a Husqvarna and they sold all 5, 7, and 9. I believe they sold 5. She didn't have one, but anyway, the grooves serve the purpose of spacing your tucks, and it's where to place the tuck. So it depends how far. Your project should tell you how far to space them. So for example, let's look at this piece. This was really easy because I didn't really feel like making a ton of tucks. It takes a little while to do that, and which, you know, if you have a lot of tucks to make, you can, and I'll explain that when we actually sew this, but you can do it in the round, so you can sew it together, so you're just, it's doing a continual pin tuck and it's spacing it instead of just cutting and lining back up and cutting and lining back up. So look at this one, if I can get it to hold up there, and you can see you're always going to stitch in the middle. Okay, so my tuck is in the middle. See where I sewed it, and then I just used this as the space. I used the edge. If you wanted to, you could do it a little bit closer together, and that's where the grooves come in. So if you just want to move it over one when you come back around, you can space it over just one tuck, you know, or 2. You do every second one, and that gives the different spacings. Just really depends what you want. Very simple. So what you need is the foot first, the pin tuck foot first, and then you need a twin needle. And let me show you, this was kind of interesting. You really want the spacing of the needle. This is 1.6, and that is, the 1.6 is the space between here, okay? And you really want these to line up very nicely. You don't want the needles to move. This isn't optimal because I can see it moving just a tiny little bit when I put the needles in, and you really don't want them to move at all. You really want them to lay nice and flat. This was really close, like they're barely moving, and so I used it and it did work fine, but I think I'm going to get a 2.0 and see if it doesn't fit my 7 groove just a little bit better. And so those are the 2 things that you really need, and then we'll talk about the spacing, the stitch length, and what you need to make these pretty tucks. Okay, I'm going to show you how to set, I'll show you how my machine is set for this stitch. So here's my stitch length right here. There's my width. This is the presser foot. Let's go to, I didn't know until I looked that it had a twin needle setting. So I went into my menu, and I can change this, you know, to whatever millimeter I need it. So if I go and get that 2.0, I can switch that. Okay, so I'm at 1.6, so I'm going to mark that. Another thing that you want to watch is your thread tension. So if you're just not quite getting the tuck that you need, you can tighten your thread tension a little bit, but you want to be careful because if you tighten it too much, you're just going to break your thread. So if it's just doesn't have that perfect, if it's not coming up into a nice tuck, you can change the thread tension. You can also adjust the stitch length. So for this one, I want to use a 1.0. Okay, that's going to be my stitch length, and you can see now that my twin needle is chosen, and it's a 1.0. So those are the things that you can do to make your pin tucks nice, and of course have the pin tuck foot so you can space them very nicely. Okay, so the first thing you want to do, and just try little samples before you try it on a project, and I'll show you what I put my pin tucks in here in a minute. I did a little tea towel, but so to do a little sample, just fold it in half, and we're going to use that crease as our center. Okay, and I'm going to line it up right in the center, and we've set the length and the needle. And you know, I'm using 100% cotton, so it's just white cotton thread, number 60. Yep. And thread both. Let me show you this too. If you're, well, let's stitch first. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch. Sorry, let's get my glasses on here. I'm going to stitch right down the center. And you want to stitch a little bit, and then you want to look at it. And you want to make sure that you're getting the tuck that looks nice. You want to make sure that it's actually rising up and it looks nice. And that does look nice. If it doesn't, again, what you want to do is you want to maybe tighten up your thread tension just a little. So I'm going to go right down, keep it lined up in the center. If you look away, it's very easy to lose where you were at. You could lose right where you're at. So now, since this is just a sample, I'm going to cut it. And one thing that you might want to be careful about is some machines will, if you have an auto cutter, they might not like a double needle to come down through that auto cutter. The needle might get in the way of the cutter. Mine doesn't. It's good. So now that you've made your first tuck, whatever the instructions say, you can either line this tuck up at the foot. You can line it up to the tuck next to it, which would make a smaller one. Do you see how the pintuck foot works? That's how it would work. So it doesn't have any kind of a special, you know, sometimes I look at these feet and I'm like, well, what kind of magic do they do? Well, really, that's the magic. It's just for your spacing. Okay, so let's do a big one first next to this. And you would basically just make your tucks, and if you have a lot of them, it takes a little while. I like this spacing because it doesn't take as long, and you can still have some prettiness. But of course, most heirloom little dresses, I think they're a little bit closer together. So let's see. What do we have there? Yeah. See? If you can see. Looks pretty good. Now let's say that it starts to flatten out and you just do not know what happened. One thing I noticed is this little guide right here is very important for pin tucks. If your thread pops out of there, you're just, you know, sewing those pin tucks away and it pops out. I could not figure out why they all of a sudden had gone flat after I had done so many that were nice, and they had just flattened right out. Another thing that might happen is all the settings change. So if I go into, and I just showed you my menu, and I change, I'm going to put the thread tension up just a little bit. You want to make sure that it did not reset your stitch length or vice versa, because I changed mine once and it reset my stitch length on me, and then I was sewing just nothing but a mess. So now let's put one a little bit closer to this one. So I'm going to just, there's the middle. I'm going to line that up right with that second groove right next to it. And it's going to put it fairly close. This is not a time to answer questions by anyone. You should just tell them if they come in and start talking to you wherever you're sewing, just to be patient for a minute. So because if you take your eyes off of your guide, it's just very easy to miss and then have your pin tuck not look so pretty and spaced. And look at how close that is. It's pretty close. And you don't want to starch your fabric. I'm almost wondering if I've starched this a little bit. You don't want to starch your fabric at all. And those are really close. So I would probably do every other on a 7 groove, I mean. And I like the wide ones. Okay, so let me show you what I did with my Pintucks. So I put this in a tea towel, and you can use them as inserts, you know, inserts on the tops of dresses, you know, little children's, the bodice on a dress is what you do. And you just, this one, we just inserted it right in the back. Very nice. And that was this is the Pintuck that was just using the edge. I didn't use one right next to it. And you can do some really pretty things with them. It's just a fun stitch to learn. I hope that this has helped.